How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Yud, Daf 10 of Masechta BavaMetzia. Friends. Yo, friends. Okay, today, I guess we're doing two Mishnayos. It's interesting stuff. I mean, it's BavaMetzia, so it's like, you gotta earn it, but it's good stuff. Really good stuff. What do you want me to tell you? I feel like the first Mishnah is gonna go slower than the second one, I think, but it's really good stuff. I'm gonna just take a second to roll up my sleeves and then we're gonna jump in. Alright, so we're gonna get started on Daf Tes Amud Beis at the Mishnah. Says the Mishnah. This is great stuff. What do you want me to tell you? It's BavaMetzia. It's great stuff, but it's like, it's hard. I don't even know if hard is the right word. It's slow. He gave Wow. Yo, Chaver, I bumped into my friend on the street the other day. Not the other day, the other hour, maybe an hour ago. And he gave me some frankincense. He had frankincense, and he gave it to me to eat frankincense. It's kind of like, I don't know, like a gum or something. I'm pretty sure everything's going to basically taste like frankincense for the next little while. He said it's good for corona. It's good to fight against corona. I always think it's good to fight against corona because you won't be able to tell if you can't taste anything. Everything just tastes like frankincense. Let's go weiter. Alright. So, we're going to start at the Mishnah on the Tes Amud Beis. Alright, we already read it once. Let's read it again. Shimon. Our friend Shimon, he's riding on an animal. Way to go, Shimon. Shimon's riding on an animal. And he sees a Metzia. What's the Metzia? He sees, what does he see? He sees a package of frankincense, a Metzia. And he said, nah, come on, that's not good. He sees, what does he see? He sees, what does he see? It's hard to tell. What's a good Metzia? Oh, I know what he sees. He sees somebody was throwing away some furniture. That's what he saw. So he found a chair. That's what he saw. He was riding on his animal, somewhere between hither and yon, and he sees an antique chair just in the middle over there, just there. So Shimon says to, "Hey, Reuven, can you get me that chair?" This is what happens. So Shimon's riding on his animal. He finds a Metzia. He finds an antique chair in the middle between hither and yon. And he says to Reuven, "Hey, Reuven, Tanali, give me the Metzia." Notla. And so Reuven goes and he takes the Metzia. And guess what Reuven says? It's mine. Zochaba. So it's his. It's Reuven's, it's not Shimon's. Shimon told Reuven to go get the antique chair. Reuven goes, he picks it up, and he says, "It's mine." Okay? But if Reuven had already given the antique chair, the Metzia, to Shimon, and then he says, "Ani zachisibah tchila," look, I had already taken it for myself before I gave it to you, lo omer klum, then it's irrelevant. Now, the big shayla, here's the big shayla for today's daf. For this Mishnah, right? We're already going to get to a new Mishnah on Daf Yud Amud Aleph already, but not before we're going to have to do some work. So the big shayla is this. What's the big shayla? The big shayla is I'm trying to find the phrase. No, what's the phrase? What's the phrase? I don't know what the phrase is. Hamagbiya metzia lachavero kona chavero. That's the phrase. Hamagbiya metzia lachavero kona chavero. The big shaila of the discussion right now. The big shaila. This is the big shaila. If Reuven picks up that antique chair with the intention that it should belong to Shimon, right? Shimon says, "Hey, Reuven, go pick up that antique chair over there." Reuven picks it up for Shimon. The question is it Shimon's now? Reuven picked it up for Shimon. Is it Shimon's? So if you say, yes, it's Shimon's, well then, Reuven would be unable to then turn around and say, actually, it's mine. It's not his. It's already Shimon's. He picked it up for Shimon's. It belongs to Shimon. Reuven can't keep it for himself. But if you say, but if you say that when Reuven picks it up for Shimon, it doesn't yet belong to Shimon until he gives it to Shimon. So then it's still Reuven's. If Reuven decides, you know what, hey, I want it for myself, he can keep it for himself. So that's going to be the big shaila now. That's the big shaila. So I'm going to read the Mishnah again. Nochamol, third time. Shimon's riding on the animal. He finds a mitzia. He says to Reuven, Tanali, give it to me. Notla, Reuven then picks it up. And he says it's mine. Zochaba. So we're saying that it is in fact Reuven's. Okay, we're going to have to figure out exactly, so how's he picking it up? What's his kavanah? But regardless, if Reuven gives it to Shimon, well then, if Reuven then turns around and says, wait, but I really took it for myself first, lo amar klum, it's irrelevant, then it's Shimon's. Shimon has it, belongs to Shimon. Tanan awesome. We learn over there in Peah, right? Yeah. We learn in Peah. Who can tell me what Peah is? Peah is, I'm pretty sure it's the corner. You leave the corner of your field for aniyim, right? I saw in the art school that you could leave just a portion of your field for that name. Can it be any part, or does davka could be the corner? I don't know. Pei means a corner, so I'm going to call it a corner. So pei is that you leave a portion of your. I just said I was going to call it a corner, then I called it a portion. Okay, we'll call it a portion. You leave a portion of your field for the anim. You leave a portion of your field for the anim. Okay, now it's davka for the anim, right? An oshir can't take pei, only an ani can take pei. So now, listen up, friends. Tananos, we learn in Masechta Peah, Misha liketes hapeah, if you have a guy who goes to a field and he gathers together some peah, and he says, Arizo lefloni ani. This peah is not for me, it's for so and so the ani. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Zochalo. So Rabbi Eliezer says, okay, very nice. It belongs now to so and so the ani. Call him Reuven the ani. Okay, it belongs to Reuven the ani. Chacham Omer, the Chacham say, Yetnen l'ani anim tzarisho. No, it doesn't belong to Reuven the ani. You got to give that payah to the first ani that shows up. You can't. This guy cannot be kone cannot be makne this payah to Reuven the ani. Omar Ulas Azula Omar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Machlokes me oshir la'ani. So says Ula, the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, that this machlokes between that frankincense, it's so sticky, I'm gonna have to brush my teeth good. It's like sticking to my teeth, like as I'm talking, like my teeth are sticking to each other. Anyways, machlokes me oshir la'ani, that this machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer, who says that it works, that this guy can be makne the payah to Reuven the ani, and the Chacham who says that he cannot. This machlokes is regarding if let's call this guy Shimon, right? Shimon's the guy. Right? Shimon's taking this payah and he's saying it's for Reuven the ani. Shimon is an osher. Shimon is a wealthy fellow. Shimon is somebody who is not allowed to take payah because he's not an ani. And now he's picking up this payah for Reuven the ani. So the Rabbi Eliezer Sovar, so you don't have to, but there's a few words that you can add that make it read a little bit nicer. Rabbi Eliezer Sovar, Amrinan Trey Migo, that we say two that we can say two migos. Migo number one. Migo di iboy mafker nechose vaveoni v'chazile. Look, Shimon is an osher, he's a wealthy person, he's not allowed to take payah. But technically speaking, there's nothing preventing him from being mafkir everything that he owns, all of his property, making it hefker. And then he'll be an ani too, and then he'll be able to take payah. So he's not somebody who's objectively, never going to be shaykh to this payah. He's an asher, but he could technically make himself an ani, and then he would be able to eat payah. And migo number two, so one second. So migo de ibai mafkin dechasav ani v'chazile hashtanami chazile. So since theoretically he could be mafkir all of his possessions and become an ani, and then he will be able to eat. He will be able to take this payah. So therefore, even now he can take this payah. Umigo de zochi lenafshe. And since he can take it for himself because of the first migo, Zachinami lechavre, he can also take it for his friend. He can take it for Ruvain the Ani. Okay? So using two migos, we could say, well, since Shimon can technically be mafkir his stuff, and then he would be shaykh to it, so even now he can be shaykh to it, he can make a kinyan on it. And then Oichit, since he can be zoche to it for himself, he can also be zoche to it for Ruvain the Ani. Rabbanan Saver was the rabbis say, Chad migo aminon, tre migo lo aminon. The Rabbanan say, no, two migos is pushing it a little bit. Look, we could say one migo, we can't say two migos. And therefore, in order for Shimon to be able to take this payah for Ruvain the Ani, we would have to say two migos. And the Rabbanan say we can't say two migos. One is the limit. And therefore, Shimon cannot pick up the payah for Ruvain the Ani, aval, but me'ani le'ani. But if Shimon was an ani, and so then, of course, objectively, he is allowed to take this payah. Well, then everybody would agree that one migo, right, to say that since he could be zoche for himself, he could be zoche for Ruvain the Ani. So everyone would agree that yes, of course, that is the case. Divakol zochalo. Certainly Shimon would be able to collect the payah for Ruvain the Ani, demigo de zochi lenafshe, because since Shimon the Ani is allowed to take the payah for himself, zochi nami the chaver, he could also take it for Ruvain the Ani. Okay, so according to Ula, we say BavaMetzia la chavero kana chavero. But according to Ula, everybody would agree that where the person who picks it up is able to be zoche to it, so you can also be zoche to it for somebody else. Somebody who picks it up for his friend is konet. Rav Nachman le'ula. Rav Nachman says to Ula, but wait a second. Okay, v'lei mamar me'ani le'ani machloikes. But Rav Nachman says to Ula, wait, Ula, why are you saying that the machlokes is me'ashir le'ani, and it's about, do you say two migos versus one go? Two migos versus one migo. Why not say that the machlokes is me'ani le'ani? And pashit, it's not that everybody agrees that migo de zochi lenavshe zochi nami lechavre. Maybe that's punkt de machlokes. Of do we say that? Maybe that's punkt de machlokes. About do we say amagbia mitzia la chaveru kana chaveru or not? That Rabbi Eliezer, that we're talking about me'ani le'ani, and Rabbi Eliezer says that migo de zochi lenavshe zochi nami lechavre, but the Rabbanan argue and say nisht. Hamagbia mitzia la chaveru lo kana chaveru. Ho. So Amalei Rav Nachman says to Ula, V'lei mamar, Ula, why don't you say me'ani le'ani punkt machlokes? The Gemara doesn't say punkt. Why don't you say that the machlokes is davke me'ani le'ani doha mitzia hakol aniyim etzlo? Because after all, when it comes to finding an antique chair between hither and yon, everyone is be'etzim the same as these aniyim, right? Just like these two aniyim, Ruvain the Ani and Shimon the Ani, they both have access to the payah. So also anybody, just like the aniyim, anybody has access to this antique chair between hither and yon. And what do we say in our Mishnah? Shimon is riding on an animal, and he sees a metzia, an antique chair. And Shimon says to Ruvain, Tinali, give it to me. Notla, Ruvain picks it up. And we want to assume for now, what does it mean? Shimon sent Ruvain to pick up the antique chair for him. He picks it up for Ruvain. And yet, Ve'omer ani zochisi ba zochaba. If Ruvain then says, actually, I want it for myself, he can have it. It's his. Now, that implies that when he picked it up for Shimon, it doesn't belong to Shimon, and he can still turn around and say, actually, it's for me. If when he picked it up, it belongs to Shimon, then how can Ruvain then turn around and say, it's mine, and get away with it? Rather, it must be that even when Ruvain picks it up for Shimon, it doesn't belong to Shimon, and Ruvain can keep it for himself. And therefore, let's say that by Peya as well, the machloikes is davka between two anim. That Rabbi Eliezer says that migo de zochi lenafshe zochinam lechavre. Rabbi Eliezer says that Shimon the ani can pick it up and be makneh to Reuven the ani, but the Chachamim disagree, and they say that no, that it won't belong to Reuven the ani. That it won't belong to Reuven the ani, because we don't say migo de zochi lenafshe zochinam lechavre, and therefore, and that would be consistent with our Mishnah, where seemingly Reuven is picking it up for Shimon, and yet Reuven can keep it. So Bishlama me'ani la'ani machlokes. So just kind of like I was saying, I understand our Mishnah if we say that the Mishnah in Peah is me'ani la'ani machlokes, and the Rabbanon say that we do not say migo dezochi lenafshe zachinami lechavre masnis in money. So then who's the author of our Mishnah, which also seems to be saying that even when Reuven picks it up for Shimon, it doesn't belong to Shimon and Reuven can keep it? Money Rabbanani. The Mishnah is like the rabbis. But if it's like Ula says, that the machlokes is by an Asher and an Ani, but if it's Me'ani La'ani, then everybody agrees that Shimon the Ani can pick it up and be Zoche to Reuven the Ani, i.e., so then in our case, we would say, Hamagbia Metzia Lachavero Kono Chavero. But if that's the case, then how can Reuven turn around and say, actually, I'm going to keep it, it's already Shimon's? Hamani, well then who's the author of our Mishnah? Lo Rabbanan v'lo Rabbi Eliezer. Then the author of our Mishnah can be neither the Rabbanan nor Rabbi Eliezer, because according to Ula, both the rabbis and Rabbi Eliezer would say that once Reuven picks it up for Shimon, it belongs to Shimon, he can't keep it. Omar Le, so Ula responds, Masnisin de Omar Trilo. Ula responds that, no. Migo de zocha lenafshe zocha nami lechavero. In hamagbia mitzira lechavero, hamagbia mitzira lechavero kono chavero. So then, how do you understand our Mishnah? How come in our Mishnah, when Reuven picks it up for Shimon, Reuven can keep it? It's because he's not picking it up for Shimon. He's picking it up for himself. He picked it up for himself. If he would have picked it up for Shimon, yeah, it would have belonged to Shimon, but he didn't pick it up for Shimon. He picked it up for Reuven. He picked it up for himself. Masnisin to Omar Trila. That when he says that it's for me, that was from the onset, from the outset, from the outset, from the outset. Already he was planning to keep it for himself. And that's why he keeps it. But, argues Ula, if he would have picked it up from the outset for Shimon, then it would belong to Shimon Ochinav Mistavra. And this take makes sense. The Katani Seifa, because what does it say in the Seifa? In Mishanosna Lo, if once Reuven gave the antique chair to Shimon, Omar, he says, Ani Zochisi Ba Tchilo, that I had initially picked it up for myself, lo amar klum. At that point, it's too late. Tchila b'seifa lamali. Why do I need tchila in the seifa? Why do I have to say initially? If it's just to say that at some point before he gave it to Shimon, he kept it for himself, right? He said that he wants to keep it for himself. So then lamali pshita. Obviously, it's before he gave it to Shimon, because afagav delo amar tchila ka amar, right? Meaning, if it's just to say that at some point before he gave it to Shimon, he decided that he was going to keep it for himself. So then you wouldn't have to say. Tchila. Meaning, if it's like you're saying, Rav Nachman, that he initially picked it up for Shimon, but BavaMetzia chavero lo kana chavero, and it's just saying that at some point before he gave it to Shimon, he decided that, meaning, in the Seifa he already gave it to Shimon, right? So if he's just saying that at some point before he gave it to Shimon, he decided that he wanted it for himself, it doesn't, it's not going to belong to him because he already gave it to Shimon. Why do I need to write the word tchila? Obviously, when would it make a difference potentially for him to say that he wants to keep it himself before he gives it to Shimon? Obviously, if right now, after he already gave it to Shimon, he said, wait, I want it for myself, obviously it's too late, right? So obviously, if he's having this thought of, well, I want to keep it for myself, it's not talking about after he gave it to Shimon already. He must be talking about before he gave it to Shimon. So I don't need it to say tchila. What's the point of saying tchila? Argues Ula. The whole point of saying tchila is to say that initially, when he picked it up, it was with the intention that he's going to keep it for himself, not for Shimon. But if it would have been with the intention of Shimon, argues Ula that it would belong to Shimon. Right, so again, Salalav, Hokamashmalan, Reisha, where am I? So Pshita Afagab, Delo Omar Tchila Ka Omar. Right, if it's just to say that, like you want to say, Rav Nachman, that when he, that he's picking it up for Shimon, and we're saying that even though he picked it up for Shimon, it doesn't belong to Shimon. And it's just saying that once he gives it to Shimon, even if he had kavanah to keep it for himself at some point before he gave it to Shimon, it makes no difference. Well, then don't say the word tchila. Obviously, it's before he gave it to Shimon. So, Elalav, what's the point of saying tchila? Hakamash melon reisha to Omar tchila. The whole point is to say that both in the Seifa as well as in the reisha, it's talking about where he said tchila, meaning when he initially picked it up, it was that he was going to keep it for himself. And Davka, because he said that he's going to keep it for himself, that's why in the Reisha, he can keep it. Meaning, again, this is Ula who's saying, that Ula says that if Ruvain were to have picked up the antique chair for Shimon, it would belong to Shimon. But the whole point is that in the Reisha, when he picked it up, initially, he didn't pick it up for Shimon. He picked it up for himself. And that is why he can keep it. Because he picked it up for himself. That is why he can keep it. Pushing through the mush a little bit over here. That he picked it up for himself. That's why he can keep it. But in the Seifa, even though when he picked it up initially, he picked it up for himself, nonetheless, since he gave it to Shimon, at this point it's too late. And therefore says Ula, the whole point of tchila, the word tchila in the Seifa, is davka to say that even though in the Seifa when he initially picked it up, he had himself in mind. But nonetheless, once he gives it to Shimon, then it's too late. He can't get it back. But in the Reisha where he didn't give it to Shimon, in contrast to the Seifa, in the Reisha he can then keep it if he picked it up with the intention of keeping it himself. But if he picked it up for Shimon, then he wouldn't be able to take it at that point. Okay. Ve'idach, whereas Rav Nachman will push back and argue, Rav Nachman who says that even if Reuven would have picked it up with the intention of Shimon, lo kana Shimon, right? BavaMetzia lo kana chaveru. So v'idach Tana Seifa legaluya reisha, that when it says Tchila in the Seifa, is davka to teach about the reisha, that Seifa de Omar Tchila, reisha de loy Omar Tchila. So if Nachman says that davka in the Seifa, it says Tchila, but in the reisha there's no Tchila, meaning in the Seifa what it's saying is even if he initially picked it up for himself, but once he gives it to Shimon, it's too late, he can't take it back. But in the reisha, he didn't necessarily pick it up for himself, he could have even picked it up for Shimon. But it makes no difference. In the reisha, he could have even picked it up for Shimon, but it makes no difference since and even though he picked it up for Shimon, right? He didn't pick it up for himself initially, he picked it up for Shimon, but it doesn't belong to Shimon, he could still keep it for himself. Well, Mom is pushing through the mush over here. I've done so much Babylon Talmud today and yesterday. It's Sunday right now. Mamish, yesterday I spent the entire day doing Babylon Talmud. I was a shtickle behind because I was traveling last week. I was a tad behind. Mamish spent the whole day yesterday doing Babylon Talmud, and I didn't even finish what I wanted to. So today I was still behind. Today I've done so much Babylon Talmud. What time is it? It's like 7 o'clock at night now. I'm shtickle pushing through the mush. But I think I'll be alright. I think that was probably the most tricky part, I think that was the most tricky part. Rav Nachman, Rav Chizde, Damitavayu, Rav Nachman and Rav Chizde both say, okay, exactly. That Rav Nachman as well as Rav Chizde say that Ruvain picks up the chair for Shimon. It doesn't belong to Shimon. My time outcome have a tofes lebalchov b'makom shechov lacherim. V'atofes lebalchov b'makom shechov lacherim lo kana. This is gewaldig. What's tofes lebalchov b'makom shechov lacherim? Well, Shimon lent Ruvain $1,000. Okay, so Reuven owes Shimon $1,000. Now, Levi goes to collect $1,000 on Shimon's behalf. He goes to for Shimon. He goes to collect $1,000 from Reuven for Shimon. The thing is that by collecting from Reuven, that means that Yehuda, who also lent money to Reuven, can't collect now. So it's Tofes the Balchov, Levi's collecting the $1,000 from Reuven for Shimon, but by Levi collecting it, it means that now Yehuda, who also is owed money, cannot collect it. So Tofes the Balchov Makom Shechav Lacherim. So Levi, who's collecting for Shimon, in a scenario in which it has negative implications for Yehuda, that's a problem. So if you so here as well, if you have Reuven picking up the antique chair for Shimon, and I assume that the Chav Lacher means that now other people can't have it. Reuven's picking up for Shimon now, and now Levi can't take it anymore. So that doesn't work. Okay, so let's read that again. Again, Rav Nachman Rav Chizda Damitavera BavaMetzia lachaver lo kana chaver, that if Reuven picks up the antique chair for Shimon, it does not belong to Shimon because my time because it's basically right Levi collecting from Reuven on Shimon's behalf, which now has negative implications for Yehuda, who can't collect from Reuven. So here also you have Reuven is picking up the antique chair for Shimon, which means that now Levi can't have it. And somebody who collects, right, Levi who collects for Shimon in a context which has negative implications for Yehuda, doesn't work. Eisve, Rav Rav Nachman, but Rav Asakasha to Rav Nachman, Mitzias Poyel le'atzmo, that if you have a worker is working for an employer, and he finds something while he's working, he can keep it. When do we say that the worker can keep it? The employee can keep it? When the employer says to the employee, or the worker really, Nachesh imi ayom, I want you to weed, or I think, with me today. Adar imi ayom, dig with me today. If he hired him for a specific job, so then So then the worker can collect the object. I think he has to pay back the employer. One second. Yeah, right? In the time that he spent picking up the lost object, so he'll just kind of deduce it. Wow, that's nice. From his invoice to the employee. Okay, so he can keep him for himself. Aval im amrlo asay imi melocha ayom. But if the deal, if the stipulation was a little bit different, the balabayis didn't say to the poel, do this specific job, weed, dig. Rather, he says, hey, just stick around for the day, work for me for the day. Well then, mitziaso shel balabayisu. Well then, whatever he finds belongs to the balabayis. So here we have a scenario. So we see that the poel is being koneh the metzia for the balabais, and we see that is acceptable. Shiny poel. So Rav Nachman says, yeah, but a worker is different. Diyado kiyad balabaisu, because the hand of the worker is like the hand of the bal habayis. The Amar Rav, but doesn't Rav say poel yochel lachzor bo afilu b'chatzi ayom? What do you mean that the hand of the worker is like the hand of the balabayis? The worker has his own rights, has his own independence. He can leave in the middle of the day if he wants, and he could stop his employment in the middle of the day if he wants. So Amar Le, I don't remember who he's even talking to anymore. I think it's probably Rav Nachman. Yeah, I think so. Kol kama delo hadar be kiyad balabayis hu. That, yeah, but as long as the worker has not quit and has not said I'm going home, well then his hand is like the hand of the bal abayis. Ki hadar be tamachrinahu, and when we say that the hand of the worker is like the hand of the bal abayis, it's not because he's like his eved, but he can go free. Dichsiv ki li bnei Yisrael avodim avodahem v'lo avodim la'avodim. That the Yidden are avodim to the Eibishter, but not avodim to anybody else. Therefore, they can leave and stop their employment whenever they want. But so long as they are employed by the balabayis, so then whatever they find would belong to the balabayis, because their hand during that employment would be considered like the hand of the balabayis. Amar B'chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar BavaMetzia lachaveru kono chaveru. B'chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan says that if Reuven picks up the antique chair for Shimon, it does belong to Shimon. But what about our Mishnah, which says that Reuven picks it up for Shimon, and yet, Reuven picks it up and he can still keep it for himself? The Amar Tna, the Amar Zakei li. Well, if you actually look at the Mishnah, what does he say? He says, Tna li. Shimon says to Reuven, give it to me. So he was instructed to give it to Shimon. He didn't say, be right, Zakei li. Be mizakit, which is because right. The whole thing was migo de zochel lenafshe zochinami lechaver. But what we've been talking about up until now is that since he can be zochit, he can get it for himself. He can also get it for somebody else. But that wasn't the instructions that Shimon gave him. Shimon said, "Give it to me." So long as he hasn't given it to Shimon, so he can keep it for himself. Okay, fine. That was the first Mishnah. Okay, that was. Just to work through in a BavaMetzia kind of way. Very nice. BavaMetzia has been great. It's been slow. It's been great. It's been a lot of work. I have a feeling that the hard parts of BavaMetzia are still ahead of us. I'll tell you, I'm nervous. I mean, there's Elu Metzias. On the one hand, I guess I want to feel like, how hard can Elu Metzias be? They teach it to like 10-year-olds, but like, I don't know, it's probably not so easy. Probably a mafkid is also hard, but where I really think that it probably gets hard is like Perek Hazov and Ezu Neshech. I'm pretty nervous about this stuff. So I think as difficult as it has been so far, I have a feeling that it's going to get harder. Says the Mishnah, Ra es ha-mitzia. Okay, so a guy finds a mitzia. Let's not use a antique chair because that would be very painful. Let's say he finds what's the mitzia now? What's something that you can like plop on top of? He finds a tennis ball. A tennis ball. He's walking. He says, "Ooh, a tennis ball." And Roaz HaMetzia, he finds a tennis ball. V'nafal aleh, and he falls on the tennis ball. It's mine now. Acher, and then another guy comes and slips his hand under his belly, and he pulls out the tennis ball from under his belly. Right? Reuven sees the tennis ball, and he plops on top of it. Shimon comes, slips his hand under Reuven's belly, extracts the tennis ball. It's Shimon's. Because what did Reuven do? How do you make a kinyan? We learn Masechta Kiddushin. Metaltlin niknin ba'agba. You pick it up. You don't plop on it. You don't fall on it. That's not a kinyan. So Reuven goes, he plops on the tennis ball. Shimon comes, picks it up. It's Shimon's. Shimon's, it's not Reuven's. So again, Rosh HaMetzia v'nofal leo v'acher v'echzik ba zeh she'echzik ba zacha ba. Says the Gemara. Rish Lakish mishum Abba Kohen ba'ardla. Says Rish Lakish, the name from Abba Kohen ba'ardla. Arba amis shel adam konis lo b'chol makom. This is the principle that a fellow's dalit amis are kone. That if there's a episimitziah within 4 amis, if the tennis ball is within 4 amis of Reuven, it belongs to Reuven. My time, how come takinu rabbanon? How come the rabbis made this enactment to law? Asilan tzuyah, so the people shouldn't fight. You know, it's mine. Look, if it's within the dalar amis of Reuven, it's Reuven's. Leave him alone. Amar Abaye says Abaye most of Rabbi bar Abba Peah. Amar Rav most of Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi Nizikin. Abaye says that Rabbi bar Yosef asked a kasha on this principle from Peah. And Rava says that Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi asked a kasha on this principle from Nizikin. Amar Abaye most of Rabbi bar Yosef Peah. Abaye says that Rabbi bar Yosef asked a kasha on the principle, the Dalaramas principle from Peah. Not all miktas Peah v'zorak al ashar. Interesting. It sounds like if Reuven the Ani shows up at the field and he finds the portion that was left for him, and he picks up part of the Peah and he throws it on the rest of the Peah to kind of like show that all of it belongs to him. Ein lo ba klum. No, that doesn't work to be kona all of the Peah. Nafalo aleh, if he jumps on top of it, paras taliso aleh, or he spreads his cloak over it, mavir no semena, so he just removed the cloak from it, i.e. it accomplished nothing. So we see, and similarly by shichacha, by the sheaves that were forgotten during the harvest that the aniyim can take. Now, so now if it's true that a person's daled amis are koneh, well then niknu le arba amis didei. I don't understand. The Mishnah says that if he falls down on the peah, he's not koneh the peah. But if we're saying that his daled amis are koneh, what do you mean? Everything in a 4 amis, I guess circumference or something, area should belong to him. Why are we saying if he falls on it, it doesn't belong to him? So achav ma'iskin delo amar achni. Well, he didn't say, yeah, but I'm falling on it and I want to be koneh it. That's why it's not koneh. V'itakum rabbanon ki lo amar ma'haveh. But the Gemara says, come on, that's not a good reason. If the Chacham say that anything within a 4 amma vicinity, I think is a word that could make sense. If the Chacham say that anything in a 4 amma vicinity belongs to the guy, so it belongs to him. He doesn't have to say, I'm being koneh it. Forget about it. The Chacham say, this is the halacha. It's the halacha regardless of what he says. So rather says the Gemara came the nafal galidaite de benefila nichale de nikne baba amaslo nichale de nikne. To which the Gemara says, yes, but here's the thing. Look, by default, a person's dalet amas would be koneh. The thing is, this guy messed it up, because what's he indicating by falling on the peah? What he's saying is that I'm going to be koneh by falling on it. If he wanted to be koneh by the Dalet Amos, he would have just not fallen on it and relied on the Dalet Amos. But he's not relying on the Dalet Amos. What he's saying is, I want to be koneh by falling on it. But falling on it isn't actually a kinyan. He basically ruined it. Now he gets nothing. But if he would have just chilled out and allowed the Dalet Amos to do their thing, well, then it would have belonged to him. But he messed it up by falling on it. Look, when it says Rav Papa, look, when the rabbis say that a person's Dalet Amos are koneh, it's be'alma, it's in general. If you're out and about, so then, if there's a tennis ball within 4 amas, it's yours. But besod the balabayis. But what, when you're going to collect payah in somebody else's field? Lo takinu le rabbanon. The rabbis don't say that when you're in somebody else's field collecting payah, that, anything in my Dalet Amos is mine. You're in somebody else's field. Even though the Torah says that yes, you can go into the field and you can take payah, the Torah says that he can go in, he can take payah. The Torah does not say that he can go in and own the place and say, okay, anything within Dalet Amos is now mine. No. You go into the field, take the payah, leave. Okay. On my Rav, okay, fine. So that was from payah. On my Rav, most of Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi Nizikin. And says Rav that Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi asked the kasha from Nizikin, from our Mishnah, that if somebody finds a tennis ball and he falls down on the tennis ball, and then Shimon comes and slips out and extracts the tennis ball from under Reuven's belly, it belongs to Shimon. But if it's true that a person's Dalet Amos are koneh, niknule arba amis didei, well then Reuven's arba amis should have been right. The fact of the matter is that the tennis balls within his arba amis, it should belong to Reuven, not Shimon. Yeah, but Reuven didn't say that I plan to be koneh by falling on it. But I don't understand. If the Chacham say that a person's Dalet Amos are koneh, so he doesn't have to say I'm being koneh. If his Dalet Amos are koneh, his Dalet Amos are koneh. So kiv the nofel ole galidaite de benefila nichale de nikne, baba Amos nichale de nikne. To which we say, look, by default, yes, a person's Dalet Amos would be koneh the tennis ball. But here you have the guy who dropped down on it to indicate that he plans to be koneh the tennis ball by falling on it, not by utilizing his Dalet Amos powers. And therefore, if he wants to override the Dalet Amos with his falling, so, okay, you're basically going to ruin the Dalet Amos kinyan, and falling isn't actually any kind of a kinyan, so you get nothing. When the rabbis say that you have your own Dalet Amos, besimta dodochake rabim. Look, when the Chacham say that your Dalet Amos are koneh, and that if there's a tennis ball within Dalet Amos, it's koneh, that's in like a not such a crowded place. But b'shus harabim dodochake rabim lo takinu rabbanon. But like in a crowd, in Shuk Machne Yehuda on a Friday afternoon, not, and there's like a million other people in your Dalet Amos, so saying your Dalet Amos doesn't work in that case. But it said in any place. The Kol Makom is coming to include the sides of Rishus Harabim, but it's not to say that like in Rishus Harabim where there's about 1,000 people in that Dalet Amos, that anything in your Dalet Amos belongs to you. No, it's more like a chilled out kind of scenario, so that anything in your Dalet Amos would belong to you. And Rish Lakish Okay, let's read that again. That a katana, so for example, if a katana is getting divorced, her husband, she doesn't have a chotzer that her husband can throw a get into her chotzer and then she'll be divorced. And she doesn't have Dalet Amos that if he throws it within her Dalet Amos, she'll be divorced. She doesn't have a chotzer and she doesn't have Dalet Amos. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan says in Mishum Rabbi that she does have a chotzer and she does have arba amas. But my kamiflige, what's the machlokes? Mar sover chotzer mishum yoda yisraboy ki echiti islo yod chotzer nami islo. Rabbi Yochanan says that chotzer is learned from her hand. Just like she has a hand and she could receive the get in her hand, so she also has a chotzer and she could receive a get in her chotzer. Umar Savar, whereas Rish Lakish holds chotzer mishum shlichis is raboy. That chotzer is like a type of shliach. That in a certain sense, or chotzer is like a shaliach. V'chiyechid the shlichis leis la chotzunami leis la, and just like a katana cannot appoint a shliach, so also she can't rely upon a chotzer to receive the get for her. Now, this is going to be a really interesting discussion now, until kind of like the end of the Amud, in my opinion. Mi'ika man de Omar chotzer mishum shlichas. Mi'ika man de Omar chotzer mishum shlichus israboy. Is there really an opinion that says that chotzer could be treated like a shaliach? Here it gets really interesting. V'atanya biyado, it says by Geneva, a ganif, that he steals with his hand. Okay, he goes and he chaps epis. In the elayodo, all I know is a ganif that steals with his hands. Gago, chatzero, v'karpefo minayin. How do I know that if a fellow steals with his roof, I don't know, he locks something on his roof, chatzero, v'karpefo, his chotzer, his enclosure, minayin. So how do I know if an animal goes into his chotzer and he locks the animal in there and he steals the animal using his chotzer? How do I know that the ganif is chayiv? Therefore it says himatze timatze mechomakom. It says himatze timatze biyado agneva. So himatze timatze any type of geneva. So Chaver, this is a gewaldige kasha. So the kasha is the following. It's gewaldig. The kasha is this. We're saying that if a ganif steals by way of a chotzer, so he's chayiv for geneva, he's a ganif. Here's the thing. If we're saying that a chotzer is considered a shaliach, is considered like a shliach, well, don't we say ein shliach lidvar aver? Now that is a kasha. Right? We say ein shliach lidvar aver, right? If Ruvain sends Shimon to steal, Ruvain's not chayiv, Shimon's chayiv. Shimon's not allowed to steal. And if Shimon steals, Shimon's chayiv, not Ruvain. And right, we don't say, well, Ruvain made Shimon his shaliach, so it's Ruvain's the thief. No. Divrei Rav, Divrei Talmud, Divrei Mishomin. Shimon is going to be chayiv, not Ruvain. When Ruvain sends Shimon to steal, Shimon is chayiv, not Ruvain. Now, if you're saying that a chotzer is considered a shaliach, well then, if Ruvain is basically sending this chotzer, in a certain sense, to steal this cow, well, the chotzer should be chayiv, so to speak, not Ruvain, but yet we're saying that Ruvain would be considered the ganif. What a kasha! Again, v'atani biyodo, he says a ganif steals with his hand. How do you know that even if he steals by blocking an animal in a chotzer, so then the ganif would be chayiv? And if it enters your mind that a chotzer is considered like a shaliach, but if that's the case, then by saying that let's call him Ruvain, who traps the animal in his chotzer, Ruvain is chayiv, well then that implies that you can make a shaliach lidvar avera, and that the mishaleach is chayiv. That if his chotzer is like a shaliach, and the shaliach is stealing, and yet the Mishaleach, Ruvain is chayiv, then it sounds like there is shliach lidvar avera. V'kaimelon ein shliach lidvar avera. And yet, of course, we know ein shliach lidvar avera. Wow. I love that kasha. It's just... what do you love about that kasha? What do you love about that kasha? It's just so smart. It's like it's twisted around in a knot and then comes up from the bottom and poke. There's like a beautiful kasha. It's great. So now the Gemara is going to give two beautiful answers to this beautiful kasha. Amar Ravina says, where do we say ein shliach lidvar avera, that Shimon is chayiv and not Ruvain? Heicha de shliach bar chiyuvahu. where the shaliach is also not the shaliach is also not allowed to do it. If Reuven says to Shimon go steal. Sorry, I got to sneeze. If Reuven says to Shimon go steal. Well, Shimon's not allowed to steal. And therefore, if Shimon steals and he's not allowed to steal, Shimon's in trouble, not Reuven. Where am I? So, but obviously a chotzer is an inanimate thing, and it's not going to be, it doesn't have a mitzvah losa say against stealing. It's not violating one of the 10 commandments. Well then, where am I? Well, in that case, obviously the chotzer is not going to be chayiv, so Reuven is chayiv. Ha'omer le'isha ve'eved tzu ganvuli dilabnei chinyuva ninu hachinami demichayiv sholchon. So the Gemara asks the kasha. We learned in Masechta Bava Kama that if an eved, right, an eved or a shali or an isha pigi osan ra'a, because if you damage an eved or an isha, you are chayiv, but an eved or an isha who damage, they are peturin, right, because they don't have their own money. So if that's the case, then if somebody sends an eved to damage, well then since the eved is not going to be chayiv, so then the mishaleach should be chayiv. So again, if a fellow says to an isha or to an eved, go and steal from me, that they aren't chayiv, they wouldn't have to pay it back. So should the fellow who sent them be chayav? So we say that's actually not a good point, because technically speaking, actually an isha and an eved are b'nei chiyuv. Where am I? V'hashta mia leis lehu l'shalume. It just, so long as she is married or he is an eved, in the current context, they don't pay because they don't have their own money. That's not as garsha isha nishtachra eved. But if the woman gets divorced, or if the eved gets freed, so then chayav l'shalom, then they will have to pay. Then they will have to pay back. So no, the mishaleach will not be chayav, because an isha and an eved are not inherently pturin from geneva. Just currently they won't have to pay back. Rav Sameh Amar says, Rav Sameh, heicha minon ein shlech devar aver. Where do we say ein shlech devar aver? Heicha de ibai ovid v'ibai lo ovid. Where the person has bechira chavshis. Where a person has bechira chavshis. Where the person can make their own decision, am I going to steal or am I not going to steal? But a chotzer doesn't have bechira chavshis. A chotzer can't make decisions. The ganif locked up is in the chotzer, and the chotzer is now stealing it. The chotzer had no sort of choice in the matter. So therefore the chotzer is not chayiv. Reuven is going to be chayiv. My benai, what's the nafkamina? What's the difference if you say that the shliach is chayiv when he has a chiyuv and potter when there's no chiyuv, versus a shliach is chayiv when there's bechira chavshis or not? That's an interesting nafkamina. If a kohen says to Yisrael, go and be mekadesh for me a grusha. Now a kohen is not allowed to marry a grusha. A Yisrael is allowed to marry a grusha, so there isn't technically anything wrong with a Yisrael being mekadesh a grusha. So if you say so mitzad that, so then ein shlech l'dvar aver would not apply, because the Yisrael doesn't have a chiyuv. But if you say it's about bechira chavshis, the Yisrael does have bechira chavshis. So that would be right. So if you say it's about a chiyuv, well then the ganif would be chayiv. If it's about bechira chavshis, if it's about the chiyuv, then the mishaleach would be chayiv. If it's about bechira chavshis, then the mishaleach would be potter. Inami, alternatively, ish de omar lo leisha akveli koin. Or for example, right, men males are not allowed to cut off their payas, but women are. So what if a fellow sends a fella to cut off the payas of a kohen? So again, if you say that it's based on a chiyuv, well, she doesn't have a chiyuv. So then the mishalech would be chayiv. But if you say it's based on bechira chavshis, well, then the mishalech would be potter. So lahach lishna de Omar kol hecha de iboy ovid iboy lo ovid. So if it's about bechira chavshis, so then well lo mechayiv sholcho. Then the sender would not be chayiv. Hanenami iboy ovid iboy lo ovid. In these cases of the Yisrael being mekadesh a grusha or the woman removing the payas of the child, there is bechira chavshis, and therefore the mishalech is potter. Iboy ovid iboy lo ovid lo mechayiv sholchon lach lishna de Omar. But according to the opinion, kolechet de shaliach lav bar chiyuva mechayiv sholcho, that it's based on whether the person who does it is chayiv in the thing that they are doing or not. Well, then haninami kevon delays delav b'nei chiyuvaninu, since they are not chayiv michayiv sholchon. So then the mishalech would be chayiv. I hope I said that right. In the first case, since they have bechir chavshis, the mishalech would be potter. In this case, since there is no chiyuv, the mishalech would be chayiv. Okay, michayiv sholchon. So now we had seen that Rish Lakish, who had said that there's no din chotzer by a ketana, because he learns it out from shlichus, and Rabbi Yochanan had said that there is a chotzer by a ketana because we learned it out from yad. In fact, the Gemara, is there anybody really who argues with the notion that chotzer is because of yad? We learn the Brisa yodo, when it says in the context of gittin yodo, ein le'ela yodo, all I know is her hand. Gaga chatzera v'kapeh from minayin. How do we know her roof, an enclosure, but also a chotzer? Tamlom v'nosin. It says v'nosin mikol makom, and we already know shlichus from I think v'shilcha. I think we learn out shlichus. So shlichus is from something else. So if we're including chotzer in the context of yad, it means that we're treating chotzer like a yad. So the Indian get kuleamalo plige the chotzer mishum yada yisrael. Look, when it comes to gittin, then everybody agrees that yes, when it comes to get, chotzer is going to be considered like a yad, and just like she could receive the get in her hand, her chotzer is learned out like that. Ki plige, but where they argue is the Indian metzia, is with regard to if a ketana finds epis. Ma'ar savi alfina metzia mi get. Well, Rabbi Yochanan would say that we learn out metzia from a get. That just like by a get it's from yad, so by metzia it's tzorchid like a yad. My sover lo yafinu metzia mi get, whereas Rish Lakish says we don't learn out metzia from get, and therefore you could say that that by metzia the chotzer is like a shaliach. We by same alternatively beketana kuli amalo pligidi alfinu metzia mi get, or you could say by ketana everyone agrees that you would learn out metzia from get, and there would be chotzer. But v'acha b'koin kamifli, here they're talking about a koin. My sovar, right? So by ketana we learn out from get, but a koin, my sovar yalfinin koin miktana. Rabbi Yochanan would say that we learn a koin from ketana, and that's also yad. My sovar lo yalfinin koin miktana, and Rish Lakish would say that we don't learn out a koin from ketana, and that a koin we could say that chotzer is like a shaliach. Vi by same alternatively mar omar chad mar machad v'lo plige. Alternatively, you could say that simply Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan are just talking about two different ukimtas, right? You could say that Rish Lakish, for example, that Rabbi Yochanan, for example, is talking about a ketana, and therefore there's yad, and Rish Lakish is talking about a kohen, and therefore there is you could say it's like shaliach, so yeah, you could say metzia versus get. But you could say that be'etzim, Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan are talking about two different things, but they be'etzim agree, they're just talking about two different things. Wow, we did a lot. Some really interesting stuff. I mean, we learned two Mishnayos today. The first Mishnah was the whole concept of Magbia, Metzia Lachaveru, Kana Chaveru Lo. We saw kind of the Ula, Reb Chia bar Abba, Reb Yochanan kind of thing, which was that Magbia Metzia Lachaveru, Kana Chaveru. Then we saw like the Rav Nachman, Rav Chizda camp, which is Magbia Metzia Lachaveru, Lo Kana Chaveru. Very, very interesting stuff. Then we talked shtickle about if a fellow falls on epis, does he own it? Well, he said that he doesn't own it. Then we saw these kind of two opinions of Rish Lakish and Mishum Abba Kohen Bardzo. The first one is that a person, anything within Dalet Amos is Kone. And then the second one was the machlokas between Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan about if there is a Dalet Amos and Chotzer by a Ketana, and we talked about Ein Shliach L'Dvar Vera, and when do we say Ein Shliach L'Dvar Vera or not? Ravina says we don't say Ein Shliach L'Dvar Vera when the person doesn't have the chiyuv, and Rav Sama says that it's about whether they have b'chira chavshus or not. Extremely interesting stuff. Peace out.